They say the wheels of justice grind slowly, but what they never tell you is that sometimes those wheels are operated by exactly the person you thought you had under your boot. Marcus Teller had a habit, a small, revealing habit that most people never noticed, but the ones who'd spent enough time around him learned to dread. He clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth whenever he was about to do something he'd already decided was righteous. Not a nervous tick, not a sign of hesitation, a pre-celebration. The sound of a man savoring his own authority before he'd even deployed it. Click, then action, like cocking a gun that was already pointed. He was stationed at Window 3 of the Whitmore-Bancroft branch on Kellner Avenue that Tuesday in October, a glass and steel institution of the banking variety that smelled perpetually of lavender sanitizer and something underneath it, something institutional and sealed, like documents left in a drawer too long. The branch had the particular silence of places designed to make ordinary people feel like they were being evaluated. Recessed lighting, polished granite countertops, small brass plaques with names that no one had cleaned in months. The kind of atmosphere that told you money was serious here, and if you weren't serious money, you'd better have a reason to be taking up space. Marcus had been a teller for 11 years. He wore his lanyard with the Whitmore-Bancroft logo like a badge of something greater than it was. He was 34, soft around the middle in a way that his short-sleeved button-down didn't flatter, with a weak chin that he compensated for by keeping his head slightly elevated. A perpetual, mild looking-down-the-nose posture that he'd probably developed so gradually he no longer noticed it. His hair was gelled into small, rigid spikes at the front, the kind of style that takes effort to achieve and communicates the effort loudly. He had a way of sighing through his nose that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a sniff, somewhere between condescension and boredom. Whenever a customer placed a request he found beneath the dignity of his 11-year expertise. What Marcus saw when Ellington James walked through the door that morning was, to him, instantly legible. A black man in his mid-50s wearing a slightly rumpled linen shirt the color of slate, carrying a worn leather satchel over one shoulder, moving with the kind of unhurried deliberateness that Marcus's particular species of prejudice read as either confusion or entitlement. He noted the satchel, not a briefcase, a satchel, the kind with a worn brass clasp. He noted the shoes, good shoes actually, dark brown Oxfords, well kept, but his eyes didn't linger there. They stopped at the linen shirt, stopped at the satchel, drew a conclusion before Ellington James had reached the counter. What Marcus Teller did not see, what he had no framework to see, was the 11-digit Federal Employee Identification Number tucked in the bifold wallet in Ellington James's breast pocket. He didn't see the Treasury Inspector General's badge. He didn't see the classified quarterly report on discriminatory banking practices that Ellington had spent the last 8 months compiling, the one that had already triggered investigations in 4 states and had names on it, branch names, teller IDs, incident logs, that would make Marcus Teller's file look like an opening sentence. Stay with this, because what happens next is the kind of thing that looks like an ordinary Tuesday until, very suddenly, it isn't. Ellington James had driven 37 minutes from the field office that morning with a cup of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder and a recorded briefing playing through his earpiece from his deputy, Rosalind Chang. He was not supposed to be doing this himself. At his level, this was not typically field work. But Ellington had made a career out of being present at exactly the moments when presence mattered. And after reading the complaint logs from this branch, 17 documented refusals or excessive scrutiny incidents in 14 months, cross-referenced with racial identification data from account records, he had felt what he always felt when numbers stopped being numbers and became people. The quiet, focused anger of a man who does not yell. He was 54. He had a broad face that carried its age in the lines around his eyes, and a steel-gray, close-cut beard that his daughter called distinguished, and his barber called distinguished, and Ellington called just there. He moved with the particular economy of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where every movement was assessed. A stillness that read as calm because it was calm, not performed calm, not the practiced neutrality of someone suppressing anger, but the genuine groundedness of a man who had long since made peace with being underestimated. He had found in his career that underestimation was a tool, possibly the most reliable one in his arsenal. He walked to window 3 because it was the only open window. He set his satchel on the counter with a quiet sound and reached into it, producing a certified check, a government-issued instrument for $42,000, part of a standard field operation reimbursement processed through the Department of the Treasury, and placed it on the granite surface. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that doesn't announce itself, that simply fills whatever space it occupies. "I'd like to cash this check, please." Marcus looked at the check the way a customs agent looks at a too-perfect passport. He picked it up with 2 fingers, turned it over, set it back down. He had not said good morning. He clicked his tongue. "Can I see an ID?" Standard. Reasonable. Ellington produced his driver's license and placed it flat on the counter. Marcus picked it up, read it, set it back down without acknowledging what he'd read. "Do you have an account with us?" "No," Ellington said. "We don't typically cash checks for non-account holders." "I'm aware of your policy," Ellington said. "However, that policy applies to personal checks. This is a government-certified instrument, Treasury issued. It's drawn on a federal account." Marcus clicked his tongue again. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify this check." "Please do." The verification process, by federal banking regulation, should have taken 3 minutes. Marcus spent 11 minutes at his terminal. During that time, he made a phone call, turning his back to the counter, voice low, the posture of a man consulting someone rather than looking something up. When he returned, his chin was slightly more elevated than before. "I'm not going to be able to process this today." Ellington looked at him. Not a challenging look, an assessing one, steady, deliberate, cataloging. "And the reason?" "The check can't be verified through our standard system. It's a Treasury-issued certified instrument. It has a verification code, a routing number, and an issuing office signature. What specifically is the system unable to verify?" "Sir, I don't make the rules." "I understand that," Ellington said, and his voice had not changed pitch or tempo by a single degree. "I'm asking you to explain the technical basis for your inability to process a federally issued instrument, because by law this branch is required to—" "Sir!" Marcus's voice went up slightly, not loud, but up. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and let other customers—" "There are no other customers," Ellington said. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it as a fact, because it was a fact. The branch was otherwise empty at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I think there might be an issue with this check." "You think?" "I'm flagging it." "On what basis?" "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "I heard you the first time." Ellington placed both hands flat on the counter, unhurried, palms down. "I'm going to ask you one more time to process this check or provide me with a written explanation of the specific regulatory basis for your refusal. Those are your 2 options." Marcus Teller had, in 11 years at Whitmore Bancroft, developed an institutional instinct that he trusted completely and that had, until this particular morning, never been seriously challenged. The instinct told him who belonged, who was suspect, who needed extra scrutiny, and who got waved through. He would not have been able to articulate the algorithm if pressed. He would have called it professional judgment. Other people had other names for it. He made a decision. He pressed the small red alert button under his counter, not the emergency button, the manager summons button, the one used for escalations, and crossed his arms in a way that was meant to communicate finality. "I've called my manager," he said. "You can discuss it with her." Ellington nodded once. He did not uncross his arms from the counter. He did not look around the room. He looked at Marcus Teller with the patient attention of someone who has seen this particular play run before and already knows how it ends. Patricia Helm came out of the back office in the particular way of a branch manager who is trying to project authority and peacekeeping simultaneously. Her blazer buttoned, her heels hitting the floor with purpose, her expression carefully calibrated. She was 40-something, efficient-looking, with the kind of professional pleasantness that is both genuine and weaponizable. She glanced at Marcus first, a question, and Marcus gave her a small nod that communicated his read of the situation in under a second. Patricia turned to Ellington. "Sir, I understand you have a check you'd like to cash." "I do. I've explained the nature of the instrument to your teller. It's a government-certified check, Treasury issued, with a federal verification code. Your teller has declined to process it without providing a written regulatory basis for the refusal." Patricia glanced at the check. "May I see your ID?" Ellington handed her his driver's license again. She looked at it, looked at him. "Do you have any additional identification? This type of check typically requires, by the Bank Secrecy Act and its implementing regulations," Ellington said, "a government-certified check of this nature requires only one form of government-issued photo ID. I've provided that. Would you like me to cite the specific CFR section?" Patricia blinked. "Sir, I'm trying to help you." "I appreciate that," he said. "Help me by processing the check." What happened next took approximately 4 minutes and constituted the most consequential professional error Patricia Helm would make in her career. She handed the driver's license back to Ellington. She handed the check back to Marcus, and she said, in a voice that was still carefully pleasant, that regrettably they were unable to process this particular instrument today, and that he was welcome to contact the issuing institution directly. Ellington James reached into his breast pocket. He removed a bifold case, black leather, worn at the fold, the kind of wear that comes from years of daily use, and he opened it on the counter. He set it down. He did not make a speech. He did not raise his voice. He simply set it down and let Patricia Helm look at it the way you let a document speak for itself. The badge was gold and silver. The credential was laminated and bore the seal of the United States Department of the Treasury, the Office of the Inspector General, and Ellington's photograph and title. Special Agent in Charge, Financial Crimes and Discriminatory Practices Division. His GS level was listed. His division chief's name was listed. His employee identification number, the same 11-digit number he'd been carrying for 22 years, was listed. Patricia Helm's eyes went through the recognition sequence in a way that was almost clinical to watch. The reading, the second reading, the looking up at him and back at the credential, the jaw going slack in the precise manner of someone whose brain has just sent a distress signal that the face hasn't had time to process. Her pupils moved in the specific, irregular pattern of someone rapidly reassessing every decision made in the last 8 minutes. "Oh," she said. The word came out as something between a syllable and an exhale. "I need," Ellington said, "a written refusal form documenting today's transaction denial, signed by both of you with the stated reason for refusal. I also need the security footage from the last 40 minutes preserved. I'm issuing that as a formal evidence preservation notice." He removed a small card from his satchel, pre-printed, official, and placed it on the counter. "This is the notice. Your compliance is required within the hour." Marcus Teller had turned the color of old candle wax. I I was just following procedure, he said. Ellington looked at him for a long moment. Write that down, he said. On the form. Exactly that phrase. I was just following procedure. Write it down and sign it. Rosalind Cheng arrived at the Kellner Avenue branch at 11:40 with 2 junior agents and a laptop bag that she carried the way you carry something you know you're going to open in about 30 seconds. She was 38, precise and economical in her movements, with close-cropped natural hair and a voice that had the quality of a scalpel. Not sharp for the sake of sharpness, but sharp because precision was required. She'd been Ellington's deputy for 6 years. She had seen him work. She was still, occasionally, impressed. By the time she arrived, the branch manager of the regional district, not Patricia Helm's direct supervisor, but her supervisor's supervisor, a man named Gerald Whitaker, who had driven from the downtown office at a speed suggesting he'd received a phone call that frightened him considerably, was already in the back conference room with his jacket off and his reading glasses on, going through documents with the expression of a man performing triage on a wound he hasn't fully assessed yet. Rosalind set her laptop on the conference table and opened it without preamble. "Let me tell you what we have," she said, and her tone was the tone of someone about to describe the weather, straightforward and without drama. 17 documented incidents at this branch over 14 months in which customers presenting government-issued instruments or conducting legitimate transactions were subject to additional scrutiny, delays, or outright refusals that do not apply to comparable transactions initiated by white customers. We've matched account numbers to demographic data across a study population of 412 transactions. The disparity is statistically significant at a level that would make any compliance officer weep. Gerald Whitaker removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Is this a federal investigation?" "It became one," Ellington said from across the table. "This morning. The teller, Marcus, he didn't know—" "No," Ellington said. "He didn't. That's rather the point. He made a decision he's made before, probably dozens of times, and today the person he made it about had a badge and a federal mandate and 8 months of his branch's transaction data in a secure server. The decision itself is the problem. The pattern is the problem." Rosalind pulled up the first file. "Let's start with September of last year. A transaction involving a Darrell Washington, 51-year-old account holder, with 22 years of membership. Attempted to deposit a cashier's check for $18,000. Marcus Teller required an additional 40-minute hold and contacted a fraud department that he does not typically contact for comparable white account holder transactions. We verified this through internal call logs. Darrell Washington left without completing his deposit. He filed a complaint with the branch. The complaint was marked resolved in your system 7 days later with no action recorded." "I wasn't aware—" "Gerald." Ellington's voice was not unkind. "There are 17 complaints in 14 months. Awareness is the job." The second file. A woman named Celeste Moyo, 33, attempting to open a business account for her licensed catering company. Told the documents appeared insufficient. The same documents that would have been fully sufficient under the bank's published requirements. Sent home. Filed a complaint. Complaint marked resolved. Resolved meaning, in this branch's internal parlance apparently, filed and forgotten. The third. A man named Jerome Pittman, 67 years old, who had banked at Whitmore Bancroft for 31 years, attempting to make a wire transfer to a verified account. Held for 90 minutes. Questioned about the recipient. Required to produce documentation not required by banking regulation. Jerome Pittman had been a high school principal for 28 years and was wiring money to his granddaughter's college account. He did not file a complaint. He closed his account 2 weeks later after 31 years. He did not explain why in writing. He didn't have to. By the time Rosalind finished walking through the files, Gerald Whitaker had stopped interrupting. His notepad was in front of him, but he hadn't written anything on it since the second case. His reading glasses were back on the table. He was looking at Ellington with the specific expression of a man who has just understood, in a totality he cannot walk back from, the scale of what he's sitting across from. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Ellington said, "you retain counsel. Tonight. Whitmore Bancroft's legal team needs to be on a call with our office by 8 a.m. tomorrow. In the meantime, Marcus Teller is on administrative suspension, effective as of this conversation, pending investigation. Patricia Helm is on supervised status. You will not instruct either of them to discuss this matter with each other or with any other employee. Understood." The branch's discriminatory practices investigation will be conducted under Section 5 of the Fair Housing Act, as applied to lending and financial services, with concurrent referrals under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Our office will be requesting 5 years of transaction data, complaint logs, and employee training records. Gerald Whitaker looked like a man calculating, very rapidly, what the next several months of his life were going to look like. The calculation did not appear to be coming out favorably. "Is there," he said carefully, "any possibility of voluntary compliance remediation?" "That conversation," Ellington said, rising from the table and closing the folder in front of him with a sound that was somehow final, "is for the lawyers." The formal proceedings began 11 weeks later. Not a courtroom. The CFPB and Treasury OIG process moves through administrative channels first, which can feel less dramatic than a trial, but is considerably more surgically effective. The hearing room in the Federal Building on Crescent Street was fluorescent lit and beige, which somehow made what happened in it more rather than less devastating. There was nowhere for pageantry to hide. No dark wood paneling or solemn architecture to give the proceedings a shape that might absorb the impact. It was just tables, chairs, microphones, and facts. Ellington was not the one who presented the case. He was a witness and the originating agent. The prosecution was handled by Adeze Okoye, a 41-year-old Treasury Department attorney with a reputation in federal banking enforcement that preceded her into every room she entered. She wore her locks pinned back, and she moved through a cross-examination the way a surgeon moves through a procedure, purposeful, measured, without a wasted motion. Marcus Teller's attorney had prepared him to explain that his actions were consistent with branch policy. This was, unfortunately for Marcus Teller's attorney, a defense that Adeze Okoye had specifically anticipated and prepared for, because it happened to be true in the worst possible way. "Mr. Teller," she said, "can you describe for the panel what specific policy you applied when declining to process the complainant's check on October 17th? Marcus, in a collared shirt that was somehow too large and too tight simultaneously, he had lost weight since October, visibly, described the verification protocol he'd used. Adeze nodded. "And when you applied that protocol on October 17th, was that consistent with how you apply it generally?" "Yes." "Consistently?" She let the words sit for a moment. "Because we've pulled your transaction records for the prior 14 months. She opened a binder. "On 43 occasions during that period, you processed government-certified checks for non-account holders without applying the extended verification protocol you applied to the complainant. 43. I have the transaction numbers, dates, and account holder demographics for all 43. She slid a copy to his attorney. "Your application of the extended protocol was not consistent. It was selective. Would you like to revise your answer?" Marcus Teller's attorney requested a recess. When they came back, Marcus had a new answer. The protocol had been applied based on his assessment of risk. Adeze accepted this without visible reaction. "Risk assessment," she said. Can you walk the panel through the risk factors that were present in the complainant's transaction that were absent in, say, this transaction? She put a document in front of him. From March 14th, in which you processed a non-account holder certified check for a white male customer without extended verification? Same check amount, different outcome. What was the risk differential? Marcus had no answer. He looked at the document. He looked at his attorney. He looked at the panel. He said he didn't recall the specific transaction. Adeze told him that was fine, because she recalled it, and she had his teller notes from that day, which she then read into the record, noting the absence of any risk flag. The quiet part that Marcus had said out loud, the part that he'd said to his manager that morning in the back office, caught on the branch's interior audio system, which Ellington's evidence preservation notice had ensured was not overwritten, was played. His voice, rendered slightly tinny through the speakers but entirely intelligible. I don't know what his deal is, but he's not getting that kind of cash without me looking twice. I don't care what the check says. The panel chair, a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, who had not visibly reacted to anything in the preceding 4 hours, made a note that took approximately 12 seconds to write. Adeze moved on without comment. Patricia Helm's testimony revealed that she had been aware of 3 of the 17 complaints and had marked them resolved under a branch policy of handling customer complaints internally where possible. She had not escalated any of them. She had not reported any of them to the regional compliance office. She had not, she admitted, reviewed the transaction data to assess whether a pattern existed. When Adeze asked her whether she felt that response had been adequate, Patricia said, in a voice that had lost its professional pleasantness somewhere around the 2nd hour of testimony, that she had been doing her best with the resources she had. Gerald Whitaker testified that he had received a compliance audit report 7 months prior that had flagged elevated customer satisfaction variance by demographic segment at the Kellner Avenue branch, and that he had scheduled a follow-up review that had not, due to other operational priorities, yet occurred. So you were aware, Adeze said, that something was wrong. I was aware of a flag in a report, yes. And you chose not to prioritize it. Gerald looked at his hands. That's fair, he said. The final determination was released on a Friday, 37 days after the close of testimony. Whitmore Bancroft was assessed a civil monetary penalty of $4.7 million under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and Parallel Fair Housing Act provisions. The penalty was structured with $2 million directed to a remediation fund for verified affected customers, including Darrell Washington, Celeste Moyo, and Jerome Pittman, along with 14 others identified during the investigation's expansion, and the remainder applied to a mandatory compliance infrastructure overhaul, the implementation of which would be monitored by an independent auditor appointed by the Treasury OIG for a period of 4 years. Marcus Teller was terminated. His termination was for cause, which under his employment agreement forfeited his vested pension benefits from the preceding 11 years. The branch's records showed he had 9 more months until the pension fully vested. He was also named individually in a civil rights complaint filed under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, which survived a motion to dismiss and settled 14 months later for an amount his attorney declined to disclose, but that people in his former branch had opinions about. Patricia Helm resigned before she could be terminated. The distinction, in terms of her references and future employment prospects in banking, was not as meaningful as she'd hoped. Gerald Whitaker was placed on administrative leave during a 6-month internal investigation and ultimately accepted a mutually agreed separation from Whitmore Bancroft. His name appeared in the Treasury OIG's published enforcement report, which is a searchable document accessible to anyone conducting a background check on a senior financial officer. Marcus Teller found work 8 months later at a private security firm that contracted with a logistics company near the airport. He wore a gray uniform with his first name on a patch over his left breast pocket. The security badge, plastic, laminated, with his photo in the corner, bore no gold. No insignia of anything except the name of the company, in a font chosen for visibility rather than dignity. He was required, in his first week, to complete a federally mandated anti-discrimination training module. The module was 12 minutes long. It covered the basics. He clicked through the slides quickly. He passed the final quiz on his second attempt. His former colleagues at the Kellner Avenue branch did not reach out. His girlfriend of 4 years had left 6 weeks into the investigation, not dramatically, but practically. She worked in financial services and understood, before Marcus fully did, what the documents meant. His apartment in the Ridgeline complex was replaced by a 1-bedroom in a building that didn't have a doorman. He had a period of what he called reassessment, and what the therapist he briefly saw called something more specific and less flattering. Whether Marcus Teller understood what he had done, truly understood it as the thing it was, and not just as an unfortunate professional event that had happened to him, is a question that probably doesn't have a satisfying answer. He told a former coworker, in a text message that the coworker later shared, that he felt he had been made an example. He was not, by his account, wrong. He had been made an example. The distinction he failed to grasp was that he had made himself the example by doing, on one October morning in front of the wrong person, exactly what he had been doing for years in front of people who had less recourse. Ellington James went back to his office the afternoon the determination was released and read it once, front to back, in the quiet way he read everything, taking it in steadily, without celebration, because celebration had never been the point. His assistant, a young man named Terrence who had been with him for 2 years, and who had a habit of appearing in the doorway when news landed, appeared in the doorway. 4.7, Terrence said. 4.7, Ellington confirmed. 17 victims compensated. 17 that we found. Terrence nodded. He understood the distinction. He was learning, in working for Ellington, to always understand the distinction between what was resolved and what was remaining. The Kellner Avenue determination became one of 3 cases that Ellington's division cited in the development of the Retail Banking Equity Compliance Framework, a set of internal audit standards that the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council incorporated into its examination guidelines 18 months later. The framework required member institutions to conduct quarterly demographic transaction analysis across teller-level decisions, the level specifically where pattern discrimination was statistically most likely to occur and historically least likely to be caught. Jerome Pittman, who had closed his account after 31 years without writing down why, received a letter from the remediation administrator. He read it at his kitchen table. He did not cash the check immediately. He held it for a few days, turning it over in his hands the way you handle something that arrived later than it should have. Then he deposited it at a different bank on a Thursday morning, and the teller said good morning and processed it in under 3 minutes and gave him his receipt and said, "Have a good day." He did. Here is what I think about when I think about this story. Not the penalty, though $4.7 million is a serious number. Not the termination, though 11 years of pension disappearing is the kind of consequence that rewrites a person's retirement plans and their sense of themselves simultaneously. What I think about is the click of the tongue, the small, private sound of a man savoring his authority before he uses it, a sound that Marcus Teller probably made dozens or hundreds of times, in front of people who had no badge to set on the counter, no federal mandate, no 8 months of compiled data. People who left the branch without their check processed and filed a complaint that was marked resolved, and went home and wondered what they'd done wrong, what they hadn't done, how they'd appeared. The thing about underestimating people is that it's always a gamble, and the gamble feels safe until the exact moment it doesn't. Marcus Teller bet on what he could see and lost everything to what he couldn't. And Ellington James went to that branch not to set a trap, but to do what he'd spent a career doing, standing in rooms where people like Jerome Pittman had been turned away, and making sure the number attached to that wrong was large enough to be taken seriously. Was 4.7 million enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you think justice looks like when it's measured in dollars. And if you've encountered something like this, something that made you question whether the system you thought was neutral actually was, I want to hear that story. If this one hit differently, slam that like button. It tells us these stories matter. Come back for more by subscribing. We're here every week digging into the moments where power miscalculates. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, because I promise you, the next one is already waiting.